And now to other important events of the day. A significant target. Ukrainian intelligence destroyed a Russian MiG-29 fighter jet. The operation in occupied Crimea was carried out by the special unit Primary. This was reported by the main directorate of Ukrainian intelligence. The Russian aircraft was hit at the Kacha military airfield using a drone. According to the agency, last night Ukrainian intelligence officers also attacked the Irtis radar complex near temporarily occupied Simferopol. Since the beginning of the day, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has already recorded 131 combat engagements on the front line. The Pokrovsk direction remains the most intense, but the Oleksandrivske and Kostyantynivka directions are also seeing heavy fighting. What victories are Russian propagandists rushing to claim on credit, and what is the situation on the defensive lines? We will tell you about Pokrovsk, Myrhorod and Myrnohrad in the next segment.
The information that the Russians control Dobropilya in Zaporizhzhia region is nothing more than another fake from Moscow. This was stated by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and they explained that several Russian saboteurs only managed to reach the outskirts of the village, taking advantage of bad weather. However, by that time the sabotage and reconnaissance group had been destroyed, and Dobropilya remains under the control of Ukrainian forces. Since the beginning of the day, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has counted 131 clashes along the entire front line. In the Oleksandrivka direction, the defense forces repelled 17 enemy attacks. Another 13 times the Russians tried to push back Ukrainian defenders in the Konstantinivka sector of the front. The Pokrovsk direction has remained the epicenter of fighting in Donetsk region for quite some time. Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandrivske, stated that the fighting continues and Ukrainian units are holding the northern part of the city. Since the beginning of the day alone, the defense forces have stopped 46 enemy assaults in this sector of the front. Analysts note that for now, the main weapon of the Russians in the battle for Pokrovsk remains disinformation and publicity.
Propaganda has done everything to create, well, you've heard it, right? Such an absurd, to put it mildly, idea from one of the Russian politicians that supposedly Pokrovsk should be renamed Putin-Grad in the future. Thank God. Because supposedly Stalin had his own Stalingrad, and now Putin needs... Because the battles here have this kind of character and significance, the city of Pokrovsk holds this meaning for Russians. Today the information space has blown up these insane, simply crazy kinds of meanings.
The Ukrainian military command notes that in the area of Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad, the Russians are trying to amass assault infantry groups and advance by bypassing populated areas. However, the Ukrainian armed forces are actively blocking the enemy's attempts, and the Ukrainian defenders of Myrnohrad add that heavy fighting is taking place on this section of the front.
In terms of the nature of the combat operations, first of all, there are constant shellings and constant bombardments of the city, with everything they have at their disposal. This includes artillery, mortars, and a huge number of guided aerial bombs. Let's put it this way, the Russians obviously see that they are weaker than us in terms of manpower, and firefights usually end badly for them. That's probably why they're trying to wipe the city off the face of the earth.
The Ukrainian Defense Forces eliminated 1,140 Russian occupiers over the past day. Thus, according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russian army losses since the start of the full-scale war have exceeded 1,177,000 soldiers. Analysts add that over the past few months, the total number of Russian troops on Ukrainian territory has not changed. About 710,000 people are spread along the entire front line.
In general, this is the only indicator of the losses that we are inflicting on them. That is, the level of those losses, yes, and the rate at which those losses are replenished under the current recruitment model that the Russian army continues to use, signing contracts for money, does not allow for a sharp increase in the size of the armed forces, but simply allows it to be maintained at a certain level.
The day before, Ukrainian forces destroyed 3 Russian tanks and the same number of armored combat vehicles. 29 artillery systems, 1 multiple launch rocket system, and 125 units of enemy vehicles and special equipment were turned into scrap metal.
Ukraine's security and the country's process of joining the EU. Volodymyr Zelensky discussed this with the president of Cyprus. Nikos Christodoulides arrived in Kiev for the first time since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. His visit is taking place against the backdrop of Cyprus preparing to assume the presidency of the EU Council at the start of the new year. The path of Ukraine to the EU will be one of the most important issues on the agenda, as will the continuation of European sanctions, stated the president of Cyprus.
We expect that the coming months will bring more progress on Ukraine's path to the EU, and the Cypriot presidency could become historic in terms of opening clusters in Ukraine and making other necessary decisions. Cyprus supports the sanctions policy against Russia for this war, for all the destruction caused by this war. Right now, the leaders of the European Union are preparing a new package of sanctions. We want to make it truly effective. This means continuing to put pressure on Russia's energy sector and everything else that brings revenue to Russia's budget.
Cyprus has always supported Ukraine. It has always stood on the side of Ukraine, on the right side of history, and it will continue to do so. In connection with our presidency of the EU Council, we will be on the side of Ukraine. During this period, when Europe is under geopolitical pressure, unity, integrity, and determination are of course necessary. Cyprus is ready and is doing everything possible to help Ukraine on its path to becoming a member of the European Union.
Britain has imposed new sanctions against Russia and summoned its ambassador after the release of the report on the Novichok poisoning case in Salisbury in 2018. Now on the sanctions list of the GRU of the Russian Federation. In addition, British researchers stated that Putin personally ordered the poisoning of Sergei Skripal and his daughter with a nerve agent, Novichok. And they told about the details of this case.
3 and counting. Russians, employees of a unit of the main intelligence directorate of Russia, arrived in the UK on March 2, 2018, under the aliases Petrov, Bashirov and Fedotov. And they came with the clear intention to kill Sergei Skripal, specifically using Novichok. I am certain, and there is a huge amount of evidence supporting my conclusions, that in carrying out this attack on Sergei Skripal, they were acting on orders received from their superiors. And I have come to the conclusion that such an operation must have been authorized at the highest level, that is, by Putin.
The moral responsibility lies with Putin, and this is yet another piece of evidence of Russia's shocking and reckless hostile activity on the territory of the United Kingdom. That is why it is very important to impose the toughest sanctions against the GRU for the first time. But it also confirms why we need to remain vigilant against the ongoing threat from Putin and the Kremlin.
The United Kingdom and Norway have signed a historic defense agreement that will allow the countries to jointly counter Russian submarine threats in the North Atlantic. This document provides for the creation of a joint naval fleet. It will include 8 British and at least 5 Norwegian vessels. I would like to note that, according to the UK Ministry of Defence, in just the past 2 years, the activity of Russian ships near British waters has increased by 30%. And Germany is deploying fighter jets to Poland to protect NATO's eastern flank. Along with the aircraft, the Bundeswehr is sending about 150 military personnel, including not only pilots but also technical staff, logisticians, and military police. The deployment of troops is a response to recent incidents involving violations of airspace by Russian fighter jets in the Baltic Sea region, as well as the incursion of drones into NATO territory.
Today we are relocating the first 4 aircraft to the Malbek airfield in Poland. Our rapid response squadron will reinforce NATO forces. The pilots will conduct intensified patrols of the airspace over this part of the alliance's territory. Our mission will last for 4 months.
The UN General Assembly is demanding that Russia immediately return all illegally deported Ukrainian children. The corresponding resolution was adopted the day before by a majority of votes. It emphasizes the inadmissibility of further practices of relocating and separating children from their families. The document was supported by 91 countries. 12 countries voted against it, including Russia, Belarus, and Iran. 7 children abducted by Russia have been returned to Ukraine thanks to agreements with the First Lady of the United States, Melania Trump. The White House website reported that 6 boys and 1 girl were reunited with their families. Hearings were also held in the U.S. Senate on the issue of abducted Ukrainian children, where Kyiv presented its evidence. In the
U.S. Senate, special hearings were held dedicated to the mass deportation and abduction of Ukrainian children by Russia. The session was opened by Senator Lindsey Graham. He emphasized that Moscow has established 210 facilities in Russia and in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, where abducted Ukrainian children are forcibly re-educated.
There are 39 specific locations where children undergo direct military training. There are 130 places where they are re-educated to become Russians. I'm not making this up. This is 2025, not 1945.
American lawmakers presented reports confirming the systematic nature of these crimes and called for strengthening the mechanisms for returning the minors. Senator Amy Klobuchar in her report highlighted the scale of the crime. She recalled her meeting in Rome with the Pope and the rescued Ukrainian children.
I was standing next to Veronica, who was held in Russia against her will. These are tragic stories of childhoods forever changed by cruelty. We need to know how these children are being moved through 200 facilities in Russia.
The senators were unanimous in their opinion. No peace agreement is possible without the return of Ukrainian children. Russia is deliberately committing genocide against the Ukrainian people. Experts from the Ukrainian Regional Center for Human Rights have documented 165 so-called re-education camps where abducted children undergo militarization and Russification. These camps are located in the occupied territories of Ukraine, in Russia, Belarus, and, as it has become known, even in North Korea. Human rights activists report unprecedented cases of children being forcibly taken to Asia.
Such camps exist in the temporarily occupied territories, in Russia, Belarus, and in North Korea. In this photo is 12-year-old Mikhail from the temporarily occupied Donetsk region. And this is 16-year-old Liza from Simferopol. They were sent to a camp in North Korea, 9,000 kilometers from home. In this camp, children are taught to destroy Japanese militarists and meet with Korean veterans who, in 1968, attacked the U.S. ship Pueblo, killing and wounding 9 American soldiers.
Senator Richard Blumenthal has been to Ukraine 8 times since the start of the full-scale war. During these visits, he personally spoke with Ukrainian children who had been abducted by the Russians. And according to him, these conversations are among the most important moments of his life as a public servant.
I have witnessed the brutality of Putin's assault, the bombings and missile strikes aimed at erasing Ukraine and directly harming the Ukrainian people, with no regard for the rules of war. And I have spoken with some of them, Ukrainian children taken hostage. I believe that the people of the United States should know about these atrocities, war crimes, and genocide.
Thousands of abducted children have been forcibly adopted by Russians or sent to militarization camps. On December 1st, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reported that, as of today, 1,859 abducted children have been returned.
It is an honor for me, on behalf of Ukraine, to thank the United States Senate and the Appropriations Committee for organizing this hearing. Children are not assets to be moved around on a geopolitical chessboard. They are people with names, souls, families, memories, and rights. Their right to family life, identity, culture, their own language, and country is protected not only by Ukraine but by every international convention ever created by the democratic world.
Kyiv, together with international partners, continues to work on bringing back all the children who were illegally deported by Russia. Everyone can help bring Ukrainian children home. To this end, the Freedom TV channel has launched the initiative If You Know, Speak Up. If you live in Belarus, Russia, or in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine and have information about deported children, share it through the Telegram channel I'm Here. Kyiv guarantees your anonymity. Help the children return home. Victoria Chistyukina for Freedom TV channel.
The Russian dictator. Putin arrived in India for a 2-day state visit, supposedly demonstrating the continuation of long-standing cooperation between Moscow and New Delhi. Analysts write that Putin and Prime Minister Modi view this partnership as part of a broader geopolitical strategy. The visit, which began on December 4th, was Putin's first trip to India since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has called on Chinese leader Xi Jinping to make efforts to end the war in Ukraine. He believes that China's position on this issue is one of the decisive factors. Let me remind you, Macron is in Beijing on a 3-day visit and has already held talks with Xi. The French president also proposed imposing a moratorium on Russian strikes against Ukrainian energy infrastructure at least until the end of winter. I hope that China will join our call and our efforts to achieve at least a ceasefire in Ukraine, in the form of a moratorium on strikes against critically important infrastructure facilities. This is crucial in winter since civilian infrastructure, particularly energy facilities, remains under Russian attacks. But in a broader sense, we must work together to achieve a just and lasting peace. one that respects international law. Chinese leader Xi Jinping stated that Beijing supports a peace agreement that would be acceptable to all parties. He expressed hope that Russia and Ukraine would achieve a just and lasting peace through diplomacy.
China supports all efforts aimed at achieving peace and hopes that the parties will reach a just outcome, a strong and binding peace agreement acceptable to all, achieved through dialogue and negotiations. And China will continue to play a constructive role in this process. In
New York, at Rockefeller Center, the Christmas tree was lit. This year, it is a 22-meter Norwegian spruce that was brought from New York State. The tree is decorated with more than 50,000 LED lights, as well as a Swarovski star weighing 400 kilograms. For many residents and visitors of New York, this ceremony has become a true holiday attraction and for some a long-standing tradition. People are willing to wait for several hours in anticipation of the dazzling start to the Christmas festivities.